Okay, we are live. Noir, thank you so much for joining. This is a very special episode. I normally, oh, nice, you changed your background.
Yeah, I hope it's more soothing. Soothing.
Yeah, yeah, maybe a campfire, some s'mores now. But this is thanks for joining on, Noir. This is a very special episode, and it's very dear to me as a topic because we talk a lot in our space about technology. We don't talk enough about what are the things to enable that technology to work and for that to be available. And it's something I like to dig into, and it's something you're very familiar with. So again, thank you so much for being on the hot seat. As you know, I'll be digging into a lot of questions. So uh, you know, be patient with me. But Nora, like if you don't mind, just for the audience here, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about your background, it'd be great.
Yeah, of course, with pleasure. So, hello everyone. My name is Naor Penso. I am 32 years old, currently based out of London, the UK. Started my work in cybersecurity many years ago in the Israeli NSA, at a couple of very interesting CISO roles in traded companies. I was the CTO of cybersecurity for a very large enterprise called MDocs, which does ERP and billing for most of your telecommunications vendors. So if you work with AT&T, Sprint, or Bell, or anyone else, probably they use the FICO product. Sorry, apologies, an MDocs product. And nowadays, I am the Senior Director of Product Security for FICO. And within my capacity with FICO, I've been there for the past year and a half, and mainly building and leading a team of highly talented experts that are responsible for everything, starting from the point that someone thinks about an idea for a product within the FICO organization, which most of you probably know from the FICO Score that most of you probably use. However, we are bigger than that. We also do a lot of things around customer originations for banking and fraud analytics for credit fraud, etc. So everything starting from anyone thinking about a product through the design lifecycle and the building lifecycle, the assurance, the testing, everything around that, up to the point that an artifact is ready to be released, and then afterwards also into our production environments. So that is pretty much the scope of my work today and my team's work, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And Nora, I mean, I'm sure you imagine a lot of people out there want to reverse engineer how a FICO score is calculated, you know?
I can only
Uh,
say, so, I will comment on that. So I honestly don't know. They have like 2,700 types of features that they use, and it's never saved. So I couldn't even change my own score even if I wanted to. So just for everyone out there, so you know.
Got it. So people working at FICO do not tamper their FICO scores. Good to
No,
know.
that
That would be funny if all you had to do is just say SQL query and say insert new value in this row.
you would have
Um,
wished.
I know. So you mentioned something very interesting. You talked about product. Okay, so you talked about securing the product, and as a product manager myself, I deal with security all the time because the users think about security and how secure is information we are processing, right? So it's always top of our mind. And, I've always kind of assumed it's a transparent property of being a product manager for a very sensitive service, a SaaS service, right? But it's very interesting. I mean, the way you're describing it, it's a focal point. It's about how you think about security as an organization, and product security is becoming this thing and this intersection, right? To me, it makes a lot of natural sense. But what was that journey like? Maybe let's talk a little bit about that. Like, let's talk about how did the conversation go from, oh, we're doing this and this and this and this, and we must do product security. When did that framework switch?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, for me, I must admit it was quite an easy journey into FICO because FICO has been focused on security well, for many years now. Working in the financial industry, there is a lot of scrutiny from the regulators, from the customers around how you do security. So I want to say it was already a well-organized organization in terms of how security is being addressed within the product lifecycle, there were substantial changes that occurred over my tenure in FICO. And I think the first one was that when I started in FICO, our main focus was application security. And when you're thinking about application security, it's substantially different from product security in my view. And I'll probably dig deeper into that in a second. But, there was an acceptance of the organization, and it changed. Today it's much different, but there was an acceptance of the organization that the security approval for a product can take a month. And that is only something that organizations that have a non-agile, a sort of waterfall type of development can actually accept, because that is not feasible when you're even more agile, like doing safe agile, which you're releasing every quarter. You cannot have a month out of 3 months, right, just for security. So I think that application security and the way that security was addressed was always a part of the product teams, as a part of the architecture discussions, as a part of the testing and assurance. The main thing that changed over the past couple of years and over my tenure in FICO was that the discussion shifted from we need to do security, I think everyone understands that we need to do security, into how we are making security more efficient and faster while maintaining the high confidence we have in our artifacts. So we want to move from a month to a week to a day, but we don't want to have anything coming afterwards and saying, oh, we missed those and those points, right? And now we need to redo everything. So how can we actually achieve that? And I think that is one of the changes that definitely happened during my tenure in FICO.
Yeah, and you mentioned an interesting point about, naturally the conversations were around application security and then the transition to product security, right? Was this a very natural progression from your perspective? Was there friction and,
Yeah.
sharing?
No, of course. So that's a great question. So I will first say what is my viewpoint on the difference between application security and product security, and then it will probably make sense also for the continuation of the discussion. So in my view, traditional application security was very pinpointed into a single activity in the entire life cycle of a product, because you were mainly focusing on how am I testing and improving the code that has been built by the product team, right? Maybe also doing some architectural aspects as the artifacts are being built and shipped out of the company. But when you're thinking about the transition to Agile, when you're thinking about the transition to software as a service models, right, where you're also running your own services, you need to look into application security or into product security more horizontally and more vertically. So think about Agile for a second. From a vertical standpoint, application security only touched the code of the product. But when you're thinking about product security, it's not just the product code, right? You have the open API specific API endpoints. You have the infrastructure as code manifests that describe how it would run in production. You have a lot more assets that have shifted from the IT into the product teams that are now subject to security scrutiny within the same process. So you need to be much more vertically oriented and looking at the entire stack on one hand. Horizontally speaking, mainly looking into the way that software has been delivered 10 years ago, right? You would have had a release, a customer would have had access to a download site that enables them to download some package. They would have upgraded their environment on their side, and everyone were happy. Today, when you are delivering software as a service, as an example, the understanding is that you cannot stop by just saying, okay, now I have a releasable artifact. It must leak into how it behaves and how it looks into the production environment, because fundamentally, right, think about around compensating controls, because we never understood how the product is working, what does the product do, etc. And today, when you're thinking about it, you have everything. You have the deployment manifests, you have this API specs, you have all of the tests done as a part of the agile development lifecycle on a sprint level. You can harness all of those into making sure that not only the development lifecycle is in production, and when it is running in production and serving customers. So that is pretty much my viewpoint into the difference between application security and product security. And the transition wasn't easy, and it still isn't easy, to be fully honest, because it is much more inclusive in terms of what you're supporting and in terms of what is the R&R within cybersecurity within the different groups. Because again, if we're thinking about the traditional cybersecurity, hey, you changed your background as well. That's nice. I like the Indeni robot. So when you're thinking about cybersecurity, you're thinking about, hey, networking is under security operations. But now we're saying, wait a minute, the person that is writing the network stack or how the network will behave is a developer or a DevOps engineer within the product team. Who should really own that portion of understanding what's happening there and can actually provide the biggest value? Is it someone that can manage a firewall because he has that experience and that knowledge over the years, and he can architect networks the best way possible, or someone that has been sitting with the product team day in, day out and understand how the product functions and what actually needs to run in order to secure it?
It's an interesting problem because I'm sure there's a lot of parables in different cultures, but the seven blind man and the elephant in the room, right? This, in my opinion, is the biggest problem or challenge with product security, because you can have a core team who understands product security in and out. They understand the product, they understand the customers, they understand what services are offered as a result of this product and how it manifests as a whole, not just one bit of code that someone submitted. And then you have the perspective of everyone that's building this product, and they all have different perspectives on it, right? And they all have different perspectives on how to optimize, how to make it secure. And sometimes they might want to push the problem to someone else, vice versa. You sometimes have this ping pong challenge, right? You want to share a little bit about that? Like, how do you reconcile the different perspectives? Because there's so many, right?
Yeah, that's again a great question and a tough one to answer, to be fully honest. So
yeah,
my personal viewpoint and the way that we have decided to reconcile that is by recognizing the fact that the people that sit within the Scrum team and the people that are actually doing the planning of the features themselves are pretty much the best people around if they are highly trained, if they are enabled to do the right, take the right decisions, and if they have the right, let's say, backbone support to do so, they are the right people to start designing the security functionality. So again, taking two steps back, right, into traditional security versus modern security. In traditional security, we would have said, okay, you need to encrypt the traffic and you need to encrypt the data at rest, right? That is a very, very structured approach into doing security, even application security in the past, right? You need to encrypt the data. My point is that the team that is actually building the product is much more proficient in saying, okay, well, what type of data do we actually have? What do we want to encrypt? Let's maybe, instead of encrypting an S3 bucket, right? Let's encrypt the data that is being stored in the S3 bucket so we can answer more threats and more threat landscape associated stuff than just doing the preliminary stuff, the preliminary security. And that is only subjected to the people that are actually designing and operating the product. I don't see how anyone external to the product team can come and say what data actually needs to be encrypted at the level that they can do and say, right, without having intricate knowledge of how the product works. So we have reconciled on the fact that we are, first of all, enabling our product teams to start the design process with security, but they are definitely a large stakeholder in our program. They need to come and say, we are envisioning our security done this and that way. And then we come with our architects and our engineers that are also very well thought and well versed in the product realms and say, okay, that's good. You might need to add X, Y, Z, or you have thought about everything, you're good to go. And that process essentially funnels all of the security functionality and all of the security requirements through that architect, right? That is essentially a product security architect that specializes in working with the product teams and making sure that they are attending to everything. But again, it goes beyond just architecting things, Charles. Think about sprint over sprint testing, right? You want to test security functionality. The product team added a new report, right? That's a very, very simple ask, right? A very simple feature. If we won't test that feature, right, we will need to aggregate so many features together and then test everything, and then it will be a generic test and not necessarily a test that is highly oriented and targeted to the changes in the application, right? So we have actually enabled our product teams to come and say, okay, these are the user stories of the right functionality of that feature because they know exactly what they're developing, but we also taught them how to think about the abuser stories. how would someone abuse that feature, right? So day to day, the QA teams are actually starting writing the abuser stories and started thinking about how would someone abuse the feature that I'm building, and then we are sitting with them, helping them, mature and getting mature, and of course doing all of our tests on top of it. So we are just adding another layer, and that is essentially spread across all of the product teams and enables the company as a whole to grow from a security standpoint.
It's a really good point, and it's interesting because I'll give you like an anecdote, and we can share this. But we have a bug bunny program, and I'm sure you guys too, right? And Yanni, he acts as our CISO, brought up to my attention, hey, did you know we are leaking the token when the user wants to log in through the web application? I was like, what are you talking about? How would the user have it? That means nothing, right? And technically it was true, right? Like if you look at the findings, there's a static token, and the static token is just to begin the transaction of an anonymous user to now a verified and authenticated user. That was an engineering and architecture choice, right? And I saw that and I was like, okay, I'm not going to prioritize this, because from our perspective, no one can do anything with this token. It is unauthorized to do any activity. It is just counted as and identified as an anonymous user. And the only activity they can allow to do is authenticate themselves with a certain credentials if they have the credentials, right? And then me as a product person, I understand that. And it's interesting when you're talking about this, but in my head, I have to calculate, what are the risks really involved here? What are the exposures? Now, I am involved during the development of the product, so I understand what these aspects mean. If I were to talk to just individuals within the team, they might have a different perspective. But that interaction between Yanni and myself was really, really valuable, right? Because it helps me understand how to weigh this into the sprint, because we do work in sprints, right? We are working in Agile. And then it helps me understand, and it's my responsibility to understand, I bear the burden of what do I do with this product? Because this is dealing with a lot of sensitive information. So, the alignment with the product team is a very interesting approach, because, if you looked at the much more stringent definitions around how security is defined, it's exactly how you said. Like, if there's a CVE that is high severity, you must deal with it, and you must move before you move on to do anything else, right? Like, and that was the approach. And from a product team perspective, there's no way to weigh in and provide input around this, and it's a very interesting problem, right? So I love the dynamic and how you describe that, because we see that end to end on our end, right? But now talking about something else here, since you touched on this, because it's really hard, is what are some of these important KPIs to think about for product security, right?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying I am a true believer that my job only exists because people haven't done their jobs, right? So we need to realize the fact that any security issue fundamentally starts with some malfunctioned process somewhere along the way that drove that security issue. Security issue is not, it's not the way, right? It's just the authentified code that I can actually run or do a PR, right? A pull request to merge it into the code base itself, because you trust your code and you know that, and you trust your tests and you know that the tests are valid, right? A lot of the things that we have heard over the years, and I've heard that in many of my older positions, was, I don't know what will happen if I will update my package. I need to try it on, right? I'll update and I'll let you know. And that is not a viable answer today. Of course it is viable, but if you're thinking about the way that it's built, our assumption needs to be that if there is a significant amount of trust and confidence in the testing, then we can make security much less of a hassle for the product teams. So instead of thinking about, it will take me 2 weeks to check the updates on these packages, think about, if I am trusting my tests and I know that they are functionally and non-functionally validating the code, if they pass, then it passes, and I don't need to think about anything else. But it can only work if you're trusting your tests. So a couple of other non-security ones. So definitely user and abuser stories being present, and how much coverage do we have of those stories in the test cases that are being generated in the features. Again, those are not security tests. Abuse stories are just product teams describing what shouldn't happen with their products. They are already doing that today, right? If I'm asking for a page and I'm getting a 404, that means that something broke. That is an abuser story. It's not a user story. So we shouldn't necessarily attribute that to security directly. And the last point is how many of our changes are manual. So this is, again, a non-security essential question, right? But if we are really trying to drive CI/CD forward, how many of our activities post-CD are then manual? Because that is a very fertile ground for breaking stuff. So think about, you made changes after deployment. Now you are redeploying the same manifest and everything breaks because someone changed it manually and no one went back and changed the manifest, right? Or you have a DR situation and then you are not sure that your DR will actually be able to spin up because there are changes between the source and the disaster recovery. And again, you don't trust your manifests. So definitely those are non-security ones that are very interesting from a security perspective. The security ones, I would probably say from the basic moving up, what is the coverage we have for product security? So what is the coverage can vary between, first of all, how much percentage of our products are actually being tracked, traced, and validated by product security. Secondly, how many of them are onboarded into our tooling stack, the static scanning, the dynamic scanning, the source composition analysis, our infrastructure as code manifest scanning, etc. So all of those are a part of that, coverage for products. Today, we're also measuring, and I'm giving it a buzzword name, but I will explain how left are we. And how left are we is being measured in multiple ways. We all talk about shift left, but how does shift left actually apply to product security? So first of all, how left? IDE is as left as you can go. If the developers have the IDE plugin for your software composition analysis and your static code scanning plugin in their developer interface, that is as left as you can go. Then moving a little bit right from there, how many of your tools run upon commit? How many of your tools run upon a pull request? How many tools are embedded into the CI cycle? In our case, it's Jenkins, but in any company's case, it might be different. But how many of the tests are actually being there? And finally, and we'll probably we might touch on that later. How much of it is actually enforced, right? So everyone talk about CI/CD. People don't talk about the challenges. We might want to touch on that a little bit later. But the challenge comes when we are starting to think about enforcements for your continuous deployment and for your continuous integration, but mainly for deployment.
So, when you share about the KPIs, this is when it started hitting me about how, when you talk about, security is just a reflection of the product, right? Or of how the security team is just a reflection of how insecure, right? And it's an interesting thing because the way you talked about what are the more important KPIs, it was interesting. The leading indicators aren't security coverage, or aren't how secure or insecure you are. The leading indicators are, how is your product being built? And then what are the workflows? And then what are the risks in each of these workflows, right? And that's a very interesting topic because, there are so many cases where you cannot just simply slap in a CI/CD methodology in a certain product and everything's okay, right? I can't describe too much about our architecture because this is sensitive, but there are cases where you can't just slap everything into CI/CD and say, everything's automated and we have tests for everything. That is true, right?
Yeah, and that's pretty much where I think most organizations will start struggling with CI/CD and security. At the end of the day, you are absolutely right. It is starting with how the product is being developed. At the end of the day, again, I'm being fully honest. If the product teams would have done their jobs 100%, I would have been out of the job, and that means that everyone are happy and secure. But we are moving into a future where it will be possible for us to at least, utilize our security powers, which are very, very important, to doing stuff that is much more fundamentally required or important for the product growth than just coming and saying you have a CVE, you need to fix that CVE. If you are just slapping in CI/CD, then what will happen? And this is a guaranteed thing. If anyone in the audience finds out that this is different, please let me know. I'm looking to do a research on that topic. So you will integrate the tools into your pipeline. Everyone will be happy. Hey, security are inside our pipeline. It's automated. And then you have defects. And then you have a lot of false positives because most of the tools in our market are pretty much false positive generators. It's like worse than what you can ever think about. So, and I don't necessarily blame them, right? If you have a secret that is commented in a Word file or in a doc file, right? That is not necessarily actually attributed to code, or if you have a sample code as a commented annotation in your code, of course your static code scanning will find that as a secret, and then it will say, hey, there is a vulnerability. Now, no one wants to release an artifact that has secrets in that, right? So now security will come and say, wait, so we need to block the CI. So this is like the very, very minor side of things, because as you are moving forward and integrating more and more tools into the CI/CD pipeline, you will see more and more false positives. And honestly, I don't have a good enough answer to anyone right now into how you mitigate all of those false positives. I have my own ideas into what the industry should be doing, but definitely we are not there yet. There are tools like interactive scanning that should help in validating if some of the defects are actually viable or not. We can definitely do things like trying to measure the confidence we have for developers. If the developer for 100 times or for 99 times said, this is not a true positive, and our team as security engineers validate it, maybe for the 100th time, I will just trust his word, right? And I will say, you're right. You are right 99% of the times or 100% of the times. Why shouldn't you be right this time, right? But at the end of the day, the tool chain in the market needs to adapt to the CI/CD ecosystem. The way we measure CVEs needs to adapt and be, so CVSS3 is definitely considerate of environmental controls, but when you're thinking about how you're applying it in your environment, it's always a manual effort. How do you apply your environmental stuff in the CVSS score, trying to reduce the score to a measurable level, or to say that is actually not exploitable? How do you do that in an automated manner? Those are questions that I don't feel that the industry has sufficient answers for today.
I got to be honest. I personally feel like you know, a lot of these tools in the CI/CD are fueling, you know, security programs out there and saying, see, this is why you need cross-SOAR, or this is why you need SOAR or some sort of automation and prioritization tool to do it. And you know, I mean, you know, that might be part of the answer, but to your point, like environmental impact of a security issue is so circumstantial. And then especially when you're working in the cloud, it's incredibly circumstantial. There's no one stack fits all when you're thinking about the features you calculate when you're trying to do any sort of machine learning, right? There's so many more features than just a hand.
Yeah.
It's not as easy. Oh,
no, you are right. It's definitely not easy. And as you are moving upwards in the stack, so when you're thinking about infrastructure as code, it is easier to determine if that is something that is a false positive or not. When you're moving it up stack, think about an XML interpreter that you're embedding into your code. Now, does it mean, even if it's vulnerable, does it mean that you have any inbound connectivity calling that function? Maybe not. Maybe maybe you're only using a small subset of that library that is not exposed to anyone. And being able to actually measure that is very, very hard. And I'm hoping that very smart people are working on some answers to that, much smarter than I am, for sure.
By the way, let the record show that Naor has said, as a PM, I'm really bad at security. But no, it's true though. Like at the end of the day, you know, when we think about all the environments, like it's easier to start with, here's an idea for a product and a service. Okay, what kind of tools can help us instantiate that? And then every time you talk about it, when you go to one room to another full of engineers, it'll be a different answer. It'll be a completely different answer. And the circumstances in which that's happening is challenging. Right now, when you're dealing more upstream, when you're dealing about cloud infrastructure, it's a little bit easier, right? But even then, you know, I hamper on the public S3 bucket thing because everyone loves to talk about it. But come on, like everyone has public S3 buckets.
So actually, I actually love this use case, the OpenS3 bucket as well. And I'll tell you why I love it. Because traditional vulnerability management people, that's not a vulnerability. An OpenS3 bucket doesn't have any attributed CVEs, is not a vulnerability per se. The only way to know if that should be there or should not be there is if you understand the product, if you understand how it's working, how it's functioning, right? So when you're thinking about the new age vulnerability management ecosystem, you should definitely consider, and that's why personally, again, I don't like calling it vulnerability management. I like calling it defect management. At the end of the day, those are security defects. A configuration mistake is a security defect. A product issue, a feature that is not functioning is a defect. A security functionality that is not working in the product is a defect. So why would vulnerabilities be any different than defect of type vulnerability? And that is something that people need to start, realizing. It's the traditional vulnerability management ecosystem just doesn't make the cut in cloud native environments and for modern companies.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to pivot around here a little bit. We talked about product teams. You talked about how we need to align, and that helps with the reconciliation because there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen in most cases. But let's expand on that. Like, who are the important stakeholders? When you're thinking about a product security program today, who are the people you need to start on day one and say, I need to pull this guy and this guy and this guy. I might need to talk to them separately. I might need to put them in one room and say, look, what we're doing is not right. How does that, who are the stakeholders?
Yeah. So separating that into two, well, let's start with within security, because definitely there are stakeholders within security for the product security program. So of course the CISO, that is going without question, right? Is at the end of the day accountable for everything. So it's definitely a stakeholder, an executive stakeholder. But even within the different teams within cybersecurity, first of all, you have the security operations teams, right? When you're thinking about how, and again, if you're reflecting back on what I said about how product security, in my view, needs to act, right? A lot of the things either overlap or complement the way that security operation works, right? So they are definitely a stakeholder. At the end of the day, they have the resources and the knowledge, the fundamental knowledge about what should be happening, and they are complementary. So they definitely are a stakeholder at the table, coming and saying, those are the things that shouldn't happen on the network level, those are things that shouldn't happen on the node level, etc. And we're the team that should come over and say, these are the things that must happen or needs to happen in order for the product to operate. And the reconciliation of those two things needs to be the security suite of controls that is actually being enforced. So again, being very, very high level, right? Deny any is the security operations requirement. Allow for 443 HTTPS to one URL is a product security requirement because it's coming from a product team. The reconciliation of both is the actual security ecosystem that is being enforced, because we must have the deny any, and we must have the whitelisting of that URL, right, or that IP address. It doesn't really matter depending if your firewall. Let's not talk about how firewalls reverse engineer DNS queries in this discussion today.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think that the point is made. So they are the first counterpart and partner in that journey. The second ones are the governance, risk, and compliance teams, or the team that is doing governance, risk, and compliance. First of all, they are the users of the outputs of product security, right? We are providing the assurance and the sign-offs and the metadata and the evidence that our environment is operating properly, secure, the products are secure, they're being updated and managed in a certain way. So the governance team and the compliance team are our business users, and they are big stakeholders in the discussion. Another portion of it is the risk team that has a much broader view into the landscape, right? And they are getting insights from our customers into the customer demands that we might need to be aligned to, or the regulatory changes and the landscape that is changing. So there are definitely stakeholders in asking us and providing requirements into what they are expecting us to do. Last but not least, the Cybersecurity Center, the team that is doing the monitoring and operational response into everything that is happening. Of course, they are partnering with us because we are, at the end of the day, outputting data that helps them determine if things are, require further investigation, how they should be investigated, what are the things that they should be expecting the product to do. So all of those are internal stakeholders. And now when I'm moving upscale into the global organization view. So, I mean, our biggest stakeholder is first of all the product teams. I mean, they are essentially the people that needs to obey and align and also work with us, right, and collaborate with us into making their product secure. And I think that the big thing here is that in their responsible accountable metrics, right, in the RASI metrics, it is important to say security is not accountable for the product security. The product team is accountable for product security. We are responsible for helping them identify their deficiencies. But there are use cases in my past that I remember we going to the product team and saying, this is a risk, right? And maybe you shouldn't be accepting that. And they're like, if security needs to sign off on the risk, and we're like, we're not signing off on anything because it's not our risk to bear, right? It is the product leadership, it is the business leadership that is taking that risk decision or risk-minded decision based on the risk tolerance of the organization. We can advise not to do so. We can advise to do so with some provisions, but at the end of the day, we are not the ones to come and say, we accept the risk. This is not the security responsibility in any organization. So definitely the product teams are our bigger counterparts. And then of course the IT, because they are running the production workloads, they are essentially working with the product teams into enabling DevOps and DevSecOps in general. So of course, they're also our counterparts because everything that is coming after the artifact is being released and then it's running in runtime is essentially based on their work, the SREs, the 24/7 operations, etc. So they are also our counterparts. And last but not least, of course, again, the business, right? I sit in front of customers every other week. We talk with them about how we secure our products, how we secure our business. And the business are a very big funnel for us and a very big driver for us, right? If a customer comes and says, I am willing to pay a lot of money into something that requires special security attention, we need to come and see how we're enabling our customer to reach that goal, or how we're enabling the business to support the customer demands. So definitely the business is also a stakeholder in the product security program, because poor program or poor security of our products directly means less revenue for the company.
It's and it's an interesting thing when you talk about product and business, because product was always the intersection between R&D and business, right? Getting the business needs met, or accomplishing more addressable market for what the what needs might exist or might exist in the future, right? And so, as we were talking about it, I just kept thinking in my head, product security, and if I were to say it in just like a couple words, is to answer the question, is your product secure? And that's a hard, because like as a consumer, you think about that every time. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? I got rid of my Alexa, all my Alexa equipment after I saw the news that they were going to broadcast your internal network through a unsecure hotspot for other Alexa equipment. I'm like, no, I'm out of this. I don't trust whatever they're going to be doing in the future. I'm out. I unplugged everything. I didn't care that you can change the settings. I knew for whatever reason I was going to get locked out of changing any of these security settings later on. So, I asked myself as a consumer, whether you're talking as a business, B2B or B2C, a product I want to consume, is it secure? And the product security team needs to answer that question. That very simple yet very hard to pinpoint question. And it's an interesting thing because that applies to so many stakeholders, whether you need to be HIPAA compliant, right? Because that is the fundamental question, if you're dealing with a healthcare product. PCI, right? We can go on and on and on, right? So it's so wide reaching when you talk about product security, because as you're talking about all the stakeholders, in my head, I was thinking, that's everyone. That's everyone in the company, But, how let's say you want to introduce product security as a program on day one. You can't pull everyone into a round table and say, from now on, this is what we must do. That's hard, right?
Right. Yeah. You're on the spot. So definitely, if at day one, you would probably have the product organization or the dev organization and the IT. They are the biggest stakeholders. At the end of the day, the business is a customer of all three, right? So if you're thinking about it, product needs to generate a product, secure product security, and the security organization needs to secure the environment and the product that is running within that, right? And the IT needs to maintain, run, and make sure that it's operational. So all three are essentially, if you're thinking about a Hydra, all three are connected to the same body that is providing the service to the business. So definitely the business is consequently a stakeholder at the higher level. And I can tell you that in many organizations that I've seen in the past, the business was also a big driver into security requirements and also a big driver into making sure that the product teams align into what needs to be done. Because again, if a customer expects a security feature to be there, right? The product team can, if we expect that, the product team can come and say, the product manager can come and say, I see those things, but right now that is not necessarily top priority. And again, I'm just to put everyone at ease, I'm not talking about fixing security vulnerabilities. I'm not talking about the key security functionality. You can think about things that are definitely on the business level that are not, core security, let's call it like that, right? So the business might come and say, well, right now we have a customer that is willing to pay a lot of money and he wants to sign the deal, but he is provisional on that feature being enabled. And suddenly the product manager has much more weight in that feature request. So we can promote that. So a lot of times, right, security features are being born out of the business needs, out of the customer needs, and this is where the business is a big stakeholder in those discussions. And again, as you mentioned, at the end of the day, the business wants to know that the product is secure. The business wants to know that when they're talking with a customer, they can provide them the evidence, right? They can provide them the assurances that the FICO environment is secure, and that is essentially what we're giving them. We're giving them the compliance reports, our software reports, etc. We're giving them the things that we are able to give in order to raise the assurance of their business and, of course, the customers that they are safe with us.
Yeah, and as you're explaining that, is interesting because, I mean, I'll put it from my perspective too. Like sometimes I, as a product manager, and I'm just putting on my product manager hat for a second, is like, how do you, I mean, you have customers demanding a lot of things always. That's the nature of the business. That's a good thing to have, right? But then how do you weigh like a product security feature versus some user feature? A user may want an additional table on this dashboard versus, you need to support, elliptic curve, ECC as part of, the communication stack, right? I'm like, oh, what do I do here, right? And I know you're laughing here, but I mean, it's a legitimate problem. Like, how as a PM do you weigh one versus another? And I hate to say it, but a lot of times it's the dollar value. Seriously, it's just a dollar value.
So I will be honest, and I will say it should be two things. First of all, the dollar value, because at the end of the day, security it must not be a blocker to the business. Yeah. First of all, right? Secondly, it must be the team that enables our business, right? So definitely the dollar value counts. And if there is a new report or a new dashboard widget that is more required than some basics, like some required, then fine, and that is the right decision, right? There are things, of course, we can never compromise on, right? We can never ship products that have defects like vulnerabilities. We need to make sure that it passes the penetration testing and all of our security scrutiny. So definitely there are things that the product manager doesn't have any say in, right? He still must comply, because at the end of the day, there are things that are just required for the business to continue to run in a secure way for us to be able to demonstrate our compliance and assurances to our customers. But there are, and I will say, there are product features that I have been discussing with product managers, and we're looking to prioritize them. And again, when the product manager comes over and says, look, I need to release this feature because that is pending for 6 different customers, I can't complain. I can't argue against it. I can say, okay, I can see how that would be the value for my feature. But again, it is the product manager's decision when it's coming to those type of features. And I think that is the right approach as well.
I got to say, though, sometimes, especially when you're dealing with enterprises demand a lot of security features. That's always without a doubt. Mm-hmm. And as part of that process, that is how it helps us weigh in product security features over other regular, click op style features, right? Because at the end of the day, if you know that you want to serve a product that is very beneficial to enterprises, and enterprises will obviously have more contract values per business. Obviously you can prioritize it that way. Like for example, like early on, I wanted to make sure we had single sign-on as a product feature, right? I mean, as if you're selling to startup, maybe, right? But obviously, when you're dealing with enterprise, if you don't have single sign-on, you're not even in the conversation, right? Sorry, you're gonna say
no,
something.
So actually, this is a great feature, because if you're thinking about it from a basic security requirement, right? Like how we secure a product. If we ship a product with form-based authentication that is highly secure, it meets all of the requirements, all of the compliance features, right? It will pass the scrutiny of everyone. But then many customers will come and say, but we're a business and we are mandating SSO because that is what we need. And this is the right discussion to have, because if you are building a startup and you're guiding towards startups, then maybe SSO is not the right thing for you right now, even if it is a security feature, right? And I think that this is fundamentally the discussions that we should be having with our product teams, right? We don't need to come and say, well, you must have SSO, right? You can meet your goal using XYZ functionality. We do believe that most of your enterprise customers will enjoy having SSO, right? But there is a difference between fixing a defect or fixing a vulnerability, or encrypting data, or encrypting the network traffic, and a lot of other stuff that are at the basic fundamental level of everything you build, and whether you're enabling your customers to reuse SSO or not. And that is a legitimate business question.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I'm going to pivot into another topic here. It's kind of related, right? We talked about all the stakeholders. We talked about like you can't fit everyone in the same room on day one. You got to do it. You got to break it apart, right? And you mentioned early on, you have to think about the IT and the developers, because effectively the business is a consumer of these departments. Personally, I agree with that a lot. I align with that a lot. But when you think about it, what are the maturity stages of the product security program, right? You can't just say, from day one, we're shifting left. Anything that violates a lot of these false positives.
You try. So yeah, I am starting from the very basic. I would probably start and say the very, very low level maturity level would be ad hoc security, ad hoc product security or application security, and discovery. So that means that you are providing services to whomever is approaching you. So first of all, you are more on the inbound rather than on the outbound, right? You're waiting for product teams to come and say, we are ready to release, and now you need to support us. And if they haven't come through that channel, then they might release and you don't know about it, right? So that's the very, very minimal amount of maturity that you can have. Again, you're doing it ad hoc, you're doing it highly manually, right? So let's assume that the next step afterwards is, okay, all of the product teams are working with you, right? But it does take you a month to respond. Everything is manual. They need to come and say, run static code scanning on my code, run dynamic scanning on my code. When you have an engineer sitting and just running and providing them and serving them responses, that is, in my view, like the very one afterwards. So it's still highly manual. The next in line is starting to talk about CICD if you're thinking about the program. And again, that is strictly speaking about the tooling ecosystem. I do think if you're thinking about the entire product lifecycle, I will say that in between and across the board, right, there is the notion of making sure that you're working with the product team through the design phase of the product, and not just wait for an artifact to be ready, because that is one of the issues that a lot of organizations are facing. They are supporting CICD, they are running all of the tools in their pipeline, but at the end of the day, they are getting either a lot of issues that are genuinely defects that they need to solve for, or when they're doing a threat modeling or some architectural review after the product is built, they learn that there were some fundamental flaws in the way that it was designed. So definitely, working with the teams is a fundamental part of the program, right? And then when you're talking a little bit about CI/CD, I do see three different variations or maturity levels for CI/CD. So we have CI/CD supportive, which means a product team, you are enabling the product team to consume the tools through a CI/CD pipeline. So you're saying, here is my static code scanning plugin. here is my dynamic scanning plugin, here is my SCA plugin, feel free to use that or not use that, it doesn't matter, we'll meet you at the end for a month of work, either way, right? So that's like, we are supporting you, but we don't really care. We'll care when you get to us at the end. The next one afterwards, I call it CI/CD embedded, which means that you are already embedded into the CI/CD pipeline for all the products, right? You are able to serve them with results throughout the life cycle. You are able to help them and realize what are the results, decipher them to some extent in some use cases, right? Help them identify what really needs to be done, prioritize the defects, or not necessarily prioritize, but definitely validated they are true positives, validate the CVSS scores are accurate and assign them as well internally. So that is CI/CD embedded. So you are embedding it into the lifecycle, you are supporting them, but there is no enforcement. So you don't necessarily stop a build because you found a defect. You don't stop a deployment because you found the defect at the gate, right? So you are embedded in the process, but you are not restricting anything. You might be restricting it on the policy level. You might be restricting it as a part of a manual side process, but the restriction doesn't come within the CI/CD pipeline, which I think most organizations should strive for today, unless they are truly CI/CD and they are actually deploying into production like 50 times a day or even one time a day. Then maybe that is insufficient for them. But for most organizations, I would say that would be the strive for at this point. Still continuing the same secure software development lifecycle, the same processes that existed, but enable serving the product teams throughout the lifecycle, letting them know, working with them throughout the process, and then making sure that you only have a week worth of work or a few days in order to sign off on everything as that remains, if any, right? And last but not least, or the highest level of maturity, is CI/CD enforced. Now, honestly, every maturity model must have something that you strive for, but you never reach. That's like the goal of maturity models, having that 1 out of 5, and the 5 is never reachable. So I would say this is probably my 5. And the reason that I'm saying that is that I think that, again, as I mentioned in the discussion, I'm pretty sure that the industry is not able to support that level of maturity yet because of the false positives, because of the way we validate defects, because of the way we are actually able to do the lifecycle management at the end-to-end level with a lot of trust and confidence in our deliverables. But the highest level of maturity is that you do have gating items, like real gating items throughout your entire lifecycle with the right promotion path, with making sure dynamically and automatically that everything is fixed and aligned to your standards before you're promoting it to the next level, right? Starting from dev to to build, to QA, and to pre-production if you have any, and then production. So every gate will have a promotion cycle that will need to be validated automatically. That is the highest level of maturity that I can think of today, at least. As I mentioned, I'm not sure it is feasible for most organizations at this point, but definitely there are, again, I'm hoping that the industry will step forward with the different issues so that companies can actually move forward into that lifecycle. And again, it is subjective. You can do some stuff in an enforcement mode, even one step before. As an example, you can prevent committing secrets into your code even today, right? You can make sure that if you have any open connectivity in your Terraform template, you're blocking it today. You don't need to wait, right, for the entire stage 5 to be available. You can definitely start taking those activities, and whatever has a very high level, a high degree of trust and a low degree of false positives can be enforced. But in order to have everything enforced, I think that it's still a mileage to go as an industry, as a cybersecurity industry.
All right, so ranking from 1 to 5, if an organization is able to block any sort of artifacts being pushed to production and to be used and deployed in a live environment, if there's a secrets found that are exposed, what would you rank that from 1 to 5? So
depending on where you're finding the secrets, the secret, I want to say, if you found it in production for some reason, actually, that's a tough question, Charles. I need to think. I need to think about that. So I would say if you're thinking about the highest level of maturity, let's assume that you found a defect. Let's assume that you have an issue, right? You have a secret and you need to remove that secret in some way or form. Maybe a secret is hard because it will require some manual change or effort. But let's take an example of something that you might be able to automate. So reverting back to my point or comment about trust in testing, right? Let's assume that you're now securing production, and tomorrow morning in your production environment, there is a new vulnerability for one of the images that you have deployed, right? A level 5 or highest level of maturity, in my view, would be instead of now opening a ticket for the product team saying you have 30 days based on our vulnerability management lifecycle to fix that defect, start the entire process, right? The highest degree of maturity would be branch the code, upgrade, run the entire cycle. If it passed, continue to deploy, merge back right into master, or depending on your branching strategy, release into production and start the rollouts, right? So that you can pretty much automatically, if I may, right, fix those issues. So that's the highest tier of maturity. One step before, you will still branch the code, you will still run the tests, you will tell a human, right, I ran the tests, it passed, it's assuming that it passed, a human will still need to merge the code, it will funnel through production. One step beforehand, you can't really branch the code, you will open a Jira ticket for the product team, they will branch the code, they will run their tasks, they will merge. A step beforehand, someone will pick up a phone and say, hey, I have a defect, and a stage before that, you don't know that you have a vulnerability in production.
It's when you describe the workflow, some people seem, as feedback, sometimes people feel overwhelmed by, CI/CD or true CI/CD security and truly mitigating issues in a CI/CD way, because that whole workflow, it's a lot, right? But I mean, like, and my engineering team might hate me for saying this, but out loud, but our SLAs have been amazing. When we needed to address our update to production, at most in this whole year, we had like 6 minutes of downtime. 6 minutes. And this is because we did truly achieve CI/CD, right? And we patch things in a CI/CD way. We deploy in a CI/CD way. We don't try to do anything manual. And if we do, we need to have a really, really good justification for that. I think there's something to be said about that for as the outcome of a product that you can truly be secure. It won't actually, cause a significant outage just to patch the security, and you can still, serve businesses fairly well. I mean, like, we've been able to see that on our end, and it's something we just found out when we were measuring our SLAs last week. And like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I didn't realize how great we were at this. I'm not trying to toot our team, but yeah, I mean, it is possible if you get to that maturity state.
If you get to that maturity state, and I think that is where everyone hoped or strived to be in, right? I do honestly believe that security can be frictionless, at least on the fundamental levels and on making a product secure. I do think that it can be frictionless, but in order for that to happen, and again, reverting back to my initial comments, at the end of the day, it's not security, right? The product team needs to be confident in their testing. The product team needs to be able to deploy fast, right? It is not a security requirement to have a high degree of code coverage, right? And that is not a security requirement. And every time I'm saying that, right? It's not necessarily, people need to understand, again, security is just the outcome. If you have a defect, it is the outcome of something, right? The question is, how do you mitigate that and how do you prevent that from happening in the first place? Both of them are not security questions. They are truly product development driven questions. We as security engineers, we as security leaders need to help the product teams, first of all, recognize the fact that it's their responsibility, because sometimes people forget. But after we help them identify that it's their job, also help them mature in that way, right? And help them prioritize the things that matter. And at the end of the day, we will reap the fruits of that labor.
Yeah. So we're at the top of the hour. I don't know if do you have a couple minutes really quick?
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay. So I have a loaded question for you. Do you believe that an organization doing Waterfall today can achieve CI/CD security?
Yes. However, it will, well, first of all, if the organization decides to continue doing Waterfall, the CICD part of things will be substantially different. I mean, you can do Waterfall and still have CI/CD, or at least CI. CD, it's a question mark, but definitely CI. You can have a Waterfall development where you are still running a nightly build, right? And you are still doing the security tests and you're still providing things, even if you're releasing 2 times a year. I mean, I feel that you can still serve security in a CI/CD fashion, even if you're Waterfall. The value of security and the agility of security comes more into play when you're doing Agile, but it's not strictly for Agile.
Yeah, the instantaneous feedback, or rather faster feedback with CI/CD security, it's more apparent when the feedback is received multiple times, right? Versus weekly, nightly, monthly, tri-month, every 3 quarters, that's up to the team, right? But I definitely feel the same way. But I just was curious about your opinions on that. So thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, and it's an important distinction because, one of the things that many of us that have been working in the past with waterfall models know that story where you find a defect at the end, you go to the developer and he's saying, I don't remember writing this code even. It was like 6 months ago. What do you want from me, right? I don't know. And then he needs to go and research what he wrote in order to fix it, if he's still in the company even, right?
Yeah.
So being able to come at the same day, at the same time that the developer is writing the code and saying, hey, this is wrong, you need to fix that. It is so substantial to being able to make everything much more secure and also making the developer teams much more agile and much more efficient, regardless of if they are doing waterfall or agile.
Yeah. Awesome, Nora. Thank you so much. We'll share this recording for later on. If you don't mind, we'll be also sharing your LinkedIn profile. So you might get people hounding you. You might get vendors. So I do apologize, but this was an amazing conversation, Nora.
As long as it's not a cold call, I'm I mean, please don't automate hello something something. We found you are interesting based on your profile. We do something plumbing, which is completely unrelated to what I do. Maybe you want to talk. Please don't.
Noted for anyone listening on the vendor side. So Nora, thank you so much. Have a good day.